Move my stamps out of the way. Hey folks, my name is Prairie Rose Seminole. I'm with Advanced Native Political Leadership, and we are visiting today with Jacqueline De León from the Native American Rights Fund here to talk about election protection and what we can do in circumstances where there may be voter suppression, voter intimidation, or even confusion at the polls. Right now, we have just a few days left before voting ends on November 3rd, and we want folks to go in as prepared as possible. Since many of us, it might be too late to register to vote in your state, or it may be too late to get your ballot in. So we want to have a few conversations about all of the circumstances and potential possibilities and talk about how you can safely vote on election day, November 3rd. Hey, Jacqueline, thanks for joining us. Let me introduce you a little bit more to our folks. Jacqueline De León is an enrolled member of the Isleta Pueblo Tribal Nations as a staff attorney at the Native American Rights Fund. I met Jacqueline back in 2016 or 18, maybe even earlier, somewhere along our journey with elections and election cycles and providing protection here in North Dakota for our process here in voting. But we got to know each other even better in 2018 when the United States Supreme Court stayed the decision to uphold the voter ID law in North Dakota. So Jacqueline and her friends organized and got volunteer attorneys across the country to come into North Dakota and ensure that we had incredible poll watchers at most of our precincts here for our tribal native nations members to vote safely, securely, and knowing their rights and being protected in that way. Jacqueline is an author. She co-authored a book report called Obstacles at Every Turn, Barriers to Political Participation Faced by Native American Voters, and practices ongoing voter rights litigation. She has testified before Congress on multiple occasions, detailing voter rights issues in Indian country. Thank you for joining us, Jacqueline. Is there anything you want to add?
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and so excited to be talking to you. I've learned so much about on-the-ground organizing from you. I've learned so much about in the trenches, getting people from point A to point B to vote from you. And I really appreciate all of your work, Prairie. It's an honor to work with you. And, happy to get people fired up and also give them the tools that they need so that they can vote effectively and safely in what I think is the most consequential election of our lifetime. So excited to be here.
Absolutely. We always hear that too. This is the most important election, and this year it feels that way. I hope people feel that. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the kind of the basics around voting. And the biggest question I still get across the country and with voter engagement is, why should I even vote? Why does my vote matter in state and federal elections? I believe more in my tribal government, which statistics kind of show that. Research has shown that more tribal nation members appreciate their own tribal governments more so than state and federal elections. But we're the most legislative people in the country. So can you tell us from your view why our vote matters?
So I want to first validate the people that say, why should I vote, right? I don't think it's a crazy position, and it's one that has been taught to us and one that was, I think, forced on us. And so I want to take a step back and give a little bit of history first. So a lot of people say, why should I vote? And it doesn't seem like my vote ever makes a difference because no matter who I vote for or whatever party I vote for, nothing ever changes, right? And I think that is actually been literally the case throughout the country. But one of the reasons that that's the case is because Native Americans haven't been able to participate and actually exercise their full political power. Right now, what we found in the report, Obstacles at Every Turn, is that there are a gazillion ways in which Native Americans are made to vote in difficult and unreasonable ways that the rest of America doesn't have to deal with. the distances that Native Americans have to travel, the 20, 40, 60 miles, the full tank of gas, the dirt road that it takes to get to the polling location. The rest of America doesn't have to deal with that. The lack of residential addresses, the inability to get a ballot at your home, the rest of America doesn't have to deal with that. And what all of those barriers are communicating to you, to a voter, is that this system isn't for you, right? If it's not easy, then, and if it's not made to look and take into account the realities of your everyday life, then it's a reasonable assumption that this system is not made for you. Right. But there's a reason that those barriers exist. And that's because there's actually a heck of a lot of power available to Native Americans that we do not currently possess, but that we're entitled to. And states are very aware of that. States know that if Native Americans actually voted in the ways and the numbers that they're entitled to, that their legislatures would look very different, that Congress would look very different, and that the federal government would operate very differently. And that's because elections have consequences. In my work, day in, day out, every day I'm dealing with the administration. We have at the end of the day, I am nonpartisan. I do not care which way you vote, but I will say, the simple facts is that, pipelines, those are decided by presidents. There is access issues that are to native lands, to sacred spaces that are decided by elections, who gets to go, whether those are protected, whether those are federally protected. Those are all decided by political parties and by presidents. Climate change, those are issues decided by Native Americans. Respect for tribal sovereignty, those are decided by the candidates that you choose. The candidates that are willing to recognize sovereignty and promote it in their administrations, those are the types of candidates that Native Americans that care about maintaining their tribal governments. If that's a core value of yours, look and see where those administrations stand on those issues. Because at the end of the day, all of those types of decisions, they all fall on my desk every day. Because whether or not we have to bring a lawsuit, whether or not we're building on or fighting for just to protect what we already have, depends on the administration that we have before us. So in a lot of ways, your vote really matters. I think the people in power know that it matters and have done a lot to keep you from your power. And so I really encourage everybody to vote.
I absolutely agree with that. Our vote is power. We are power, and we need to step into it. I think that's the foremost priority of advanced Native political leadership is encouraging our tribal members to run for office outside of a tribal election. Those 526,000 elected positions across the country make a huge difference in our lives, from county commissioner to state auditor to county auditor to governor to you name it. It matters. The judiciaries are so incredibly important. The Supreme Court, right? So our vote absolutely matters. Talking about the basics, though, when you're running into folks who are first-time voters or haven't voted in a long time, what are you telling folks to bring to the polls when they vote, or what they should be mindful of if they're voting by mail or voting early?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on your state, and that's what makes it really hard, is that all of the rules are very localized and all of your options are really localized. So there's not really a one-stop type of advice that I can give to everybody. But I do think that depending on the state, right now, unless your state accepts ballots mailed after the deadline, right, that have been postmarked this week, then I would advise you to drop your ballot into a ballot drop box or at an elections office. And no longer, we are at the point where, the election's next Tuesday, and a lot of states have what's called a received by deadline, meaning you have to have your ballot in by Tuesday, even if the mail takes unreasonably long, and especially if it takes a really long time in our communities to get there. So instead, use a ballot drop box or drop it off at the elections office itself, and that might take more time. It might actually require you to look up where the ballot drop box is, and it might require you to drive to a county office, but that's really the only way to ensure that your ballot is going to get there. If you're picking up or dropping off ballots for every other people, I also advise you to figure out if that is legal in your state. Unfortunately, we're seeing a whole bunch of rules, which NARF has fought against in lots of states. I mean, we just won a case in Montana that makes it legal to pick up and drop off ballots for each other. In Nevada, it's legal to pick up and drop off ballots for each other. In Wisconsin, it's legal to pick up and drop off ballots for each other. But in other states, it's not legal to pick up and drop off ballots for each other. So take a look into your state to see whether or not that's legal. Reach out to vote@narf.org if you have any questions on that. If you're like sitting there and you're wondering yourself, like, is it legal for me to pick up, and you don't feel comfortable figuring it out, reach out to vote@narf.org. I'm happy to help you figure out if ballot collection is legal in your state. And then, you know, I can get to election day, which is, I think making a plan is the biggest thing that you can do. On election day, there might be crowds, you know, you have to really protect yourself against COVID, wear a mask, make sure that you're distancing. If you're cold, make sure that, see if you can wait in your car. You can call the elections office and ask, can I get a number? Can we wait in our car? Can I get a call? That kind of thing. And sometimes elections offices are open to do that, especially if everybody's forced to wait outside. And so that's something that, you know, you can maybe do. So don't get frustrated, don't give up, be creative about how you can keep yourself safe and warm when voting. And then depending on your state, bring an ID. And then depending on your state, bring proof of an address. And that can be hard, as Prairie knows. But your tribe in almost all states can issue you an address and can issue you a letter with your address on it. So if you don't have a phone bill, if you don't have something that says an address on it, and if your house doesn't have an address on it, call your tribe, ask them to issue a letter with an address on it that puts you in the correct precinct. And if you have trouble doing that, again, reach out to vote@narf.org, and I'm happy to help you with that. And it really just depends on your state, and it varies state by state.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. I mean, where I live in Western North Dakota, I'm, you know, moving into a house that is out of the White Shield, North Dakota community, but our address is actually Northwest Garrison, North Dakota, which has the closest post office. So we have to drive 35 miles to the closest post office if we wanted to vote early or vote by mail. You know, I was lucky to go into the auditor's office and vote early, but not every county allows that. And I got lucky because I had a relative working at the polling location who could vouch for me, which we don't typically do anymore in North Dakota. We no longer do the affidavits, but the reality for me having my address listed in the state database allowed me to still vote at that precinct. So I was really fortunate. But the barriers in place, yeah, we have, it's our
it is hard.
Yeah, it's still,
it shouldn't be this hard, and it's not that hard for a lot of people. And you know, we're advocating over here at NARF for the Native American Voting Rights Act. It's a federal bill that would make it so that every reservation had an on-reservation polling place mandated. It would require that if you had an address, if you don't have an address, that the tribe can assign an address, a building that can be used as an address, so a tribal building that can be used as an address to register, pick up, and drop off a ballot. So we think that national legislation is important, because too often the county clerk, who honestly could be from a border town and could be just very racist. That's just what we're seeing across the board, is a lot of times that county clerk, the person in charge of running elections, just happens to be an individual that lives in a border town, that doesn't view the Native American population favorably, and who makes it hard to vote. And we think that we need to go around that type of localized control over voting, because it's not fair.
Right. And you brought up the Voting Rights Act, which, passed in what, 1965 and implemented, and still has issues being enforced and implemented across the country. I think of a lot of my own father, his generation, and my sisters. We talk about how our parents couldn't vote for the longest part of their own lives. And so voting in person is still relatively new practice given the last 30, 40 years, 40 years. And now we're asking people to vote by mail, right? So when we just started maybe getting used to voting in person, we're asking you to vote by mail. And all of the pieces that Jacqueline just brought up, the takeaway is to know your rights, right? Go to your Secretary of State's website, go to vote.narf.org and check out the various measures in place that could contribute or affect your ability to vote successfully. And not to intimidate voters from that piece, but we're relatively new voting bloc across the country when it comes to the Native vote. And I also found that the Generation Z, is that what they're called? The younger folks that are just kind of coming up and 18 years old, and that younger bunch, TikTok users, they're equal to baby boomers in this country. So when we talk about expanding the electorate, our vote truly is power, because most Native people are at that age to vote and be involved in a political electorate landscape that just never worked for us before. So we can make it work. We're working on it. I think I wanted, you talked about the county clerks coming from a mindset that doesn't value our vote. Let's move into voter intimidation and voter suppression. And for folks who don't know this, like voter intimidation, it's a federal crime, and it happens in several ways, which we'll get into. But we're seeing this across the country, and we may not question it because we might feel it's an isolated incident, but documented. And I want to ask Jacqueline, what are you seeing, and how do we respond?
So first, there's a disclaimer when I talk about voter intimidation, and that's that it is rare, and that even though it may happen, your vote is still valuable, that there are hopefully ways on the ground to address it, and that you should still vote, right? Don't let them win. Don't let somebody who's being a jerk and thinks they're all that at the polls keep you from casting your vote. And there's a lot of people out there that they'll just say, nah, I'm not gonna deal with that, and just stay home, right? And that is just a win for the people that are out there trying to keep Native Americans and keep you from voting. And so if you see voter intimidation, don't amplify it. And by that I mean, don't post about it on social media. Don't talk about that day how hard it is to vote. Day after the election, yeah, write about your experiences and please let us know what happened. But day of, when people are still making the choice as to whether or not they're going to go to the polls, don't amplify an incident where somebody was acting like a jerk, because people who are just making that choice, that flash decision on whether or not they're going to go to the polls, they'll just say, I don't want to deal with that hassle, and they just won't go, right? Yeah. So that's just my big piece on voter intimidation is don't amplify, don't post it on social media on the day of election. The second piece is that voter intimidation is illegal, right? It is, but we also know that a lot of times we don't want to call the sheriff, the local sheriff, to deal with somebody that's being a jerk, right? Honestly, in some of these militia towns, the local sheriff might be the cousin or the brother of the person that's not acting correctly, right? And so I want to just acknowledge that reality and acknowledge that sometimes calling the police doesn't feel like a option that is reasonable, right? And so I think that there are several ways that you can just try and deal with an incident at the polls. The first is to immediately talk to, if you're in immediate danger, you should call 911, right? I think if you're in immediate danger, if somebody is brandishing a weapon, if something is, very wrong, then call 911. But if somebody is just, wearing partisan stuff and is, getting close to voters and harassing them and talking to them and trying to get them to, tell them who they're voting for, or is not wearing a mask and is trying to, breathe on people and keep them from, that kind of thing, immediately talk to the election official, right? The election official needs to be responsive to those types of things. And in the chat, I put a link to our page that has a worksheet on voter intimidation that cites some of the laws that make it illegal for people to act in that manner. And so, take that worksheet, and if you're going to a poll worker and telling them this is illegal, you need to deal with it, feel free to cite those laws. The other thing that you should do is call 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And they are a bunch of lawyers that are standing on by. You could also say that you're in Indian country. That call is going to end up getting routed to me or to one of the other NARF attorneys. So, because we're working in coordination with 1-866-OUR-VOTE. So, let us know right away. And also just, you can shoot an email to vote@narf.org. So vote@narf.org, we're going to be monitoring that all day to deal with it. The other thing to do is just be an observer. So you don't need to confront them. You don't need to, do any of that. Just take down notes as to what's happening. And if you see anybody getting discouraged and turned away from voting, try to get that person's information, contact information. Because if we have to go to court, and quickly try and get like a restraining order against these types of people, we need facts. So we need who was affected, who was doing it. And if you don't want to talk to them, just describe, physical descriptions and that kind of thing is fine. Just take as many notes as possible, and then just contact 1-866-OUR-VOTE, vote@narf.org, and tell the election official.
Thank you. And what if the intimidation is maybe coming from somebody working at the election, a poll worker who is asking some excessive questions and questioning whether or not that individual can actually vote there, and is trying to turn them away? Can you talk to that and maybe even discuss a little bit about provisional ballots and our right to provisional ballots?
Yeah. So at all instances, you can vote provisionally, meaning you can cast a ballot that's qualifications can be validated later. I don't like telling people to cast their vote provisionally. I like having that person try to stick it through and resolve. I know it's not everybody that wants to do that. But again, if you call 1-866-OUR-VOTE, when you're faced with that, an advocate can immediately, we can talk to the poll worker over the phone, inform them that they are incorrect. We are there to be in your corner. I am happy. I am a confrontational person. You do not need to be a confrontational person. I chose my job to fight. You don't need to fight, right? So even if in that situation you just walk away, call 1-866-OUR-VOTE, and then you can walk back up to the poll worker with your phone, and we're happy to talk to that poll worker and put them in their place and get their name and figure out exactly what they're doing and tell them, what your rights are, and ask them to explain themselves, and also have, the follow up if need be, to really make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else either.
Oh, I'm so glad you were there. I'm not very confrontational when it comes to myself. For others, I'm better, but for me, if I'm intimidated or overwhelmed, I will probably just back away. So thank you for being there. 1-866-OUR-VOTE.
And just say, you can say it's Indian country issue, and it'll just get routed to us. Yeah.
Get Jacqueline yelling at the poll workers. I appreciate it.
Not yet. It would make my day. It would make my day.
Talking to me. Yeah, provisional ballots. I mean, you just mentioned Montana and the votes there. And I think most states have a system in place that we can trust. I know our voter confidence, our confidence on our voting system might not be as high as it could be, right? But we're working on that too. But most states have a system in place where if you vote provisionally, or you may voted early and forgot that you voted early, or got an absentee ballot but never mailed it in, that your vote will count once, at least once, when you vote either provisionally or other ways. So, but voter intimidation, I mean, you talked a lot about that it's rare, and I appreciate that, and I respect, because your lens is focused more on that happening across the country, and for you to say it's rare allows me to trust that I most likely won't encounter some form of intimidation, but I'm also appreciative that you're there in case I need it. Talking to marginalized groups, and if we're getting turned away and we don't fill out a provisional ballot, if we're reporting something that's outside of the polling location, though, voter intimidation can happen outside of the polling location. Is that still intimidation if we're in line and the folks wearing the propaganda from other campaigns or candidates that trying to push us? That's voter intimidation.
Yeah. Voter intimidation, online, even online. Okay, so if there's somebody that is talking a big game about how they're going to show up to the polls, and how, you wait X and X person, or just you wait whatever county, I'm going to be there, or, that kind of thing. If you see that, call 1-866-OUR-VOTE again, forward it to take a screenshot, forward it to vote@narf.org. And then we can try and head that off ahead of time as well. If you, and this is a different topic, but online, if you see things that are incorrect, so we're starting to see, Russia actually, other foreign actors are trying to influence our elections, and they're trying to put out bad information. And one of the bad information, which is really kind of shocking and terrible, that they are putting out is there are like memes and stuff about how like voting is not, is anti-sovereignty and voting is whatever. We suspect that those are actually made by foreign actors that have seen that message would resonate in Native communities and are amplifying that message. If you see something like that, email that to vote@narf.org, and we will report it and try and figure out its origins and take it down, because that stuff is fake and it's intended to suppress votes. Also, if you see like a little thing, sometimes these are well-intentioned people that are just wrong. Sometimes it's actively wrong, that they'll have something up about, vote at such and such place at this time, and that's not correct, right? Like it's just the wrong information. We saw, I think in 2016, there was a whole bunch of like stuff talking about how Democrats vote on Wednesdays and versus like, Republicans vote on Tuesdays. Obviously, Wednesday is the day after the election. Those votes, people would not be able to vote on that day. So if you see stuff like that, fake stuff like that, email it to vote@narf.org right away, and then we'll try and take that down.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of misinformation happening across the country. My friends up in Alaska had said there was various things happening in the same way, and my friends down in Texas were dealing with a lot of misinformation. And Texas was funny because there's one drop box per county, and I have a friend who lives in, don't quote me, I want to say Harris County, which has like 4 million voters, and there's only one drop box. Like that kind of stuff. I mean, that's voter suppression, right? Like that is things that we...
Yeah, that's like state mandated voter suppression. They are terrified of the political power that is out there. They are terrified of the fact that there are a lot of voters that do not agree with them, and that if they were able to successfully cast their ballot, they would be out of power. And so you're seeing these scared voter suppression tactics, and that is just based on fear of the power that they know is out there.
Yeah, for real. I'm so thankful that you and Native American Rights Fund exists, and attorneys like you across the country fighting for our democracy and election protection. For such a long part of this history's country, it was this almost one party illiberal democracy where people showed up to vote on a regular basis, but they didn't want Indigenous people or Black people or brown people or women to vote, right? Like and they still don't. So I'm very appreciative that you're still here, and who knows, maybe you will work yourself out of a job and into a democracy that works for everybody, right? An electorate that works for everybody. But I see our time is kind of wrapping up. I wanted to ask you, and maybe this is the same for every election cycle that you vote in, but what are you voting for this cycle? What are those issues? What are those values? What are that future that you're voting for?
It's a really powerful question, and one that, as I'm fighting to get everybody to vote, I often don't think about as much. But I'm voting for my children. I've got 2 daughters. I'm voting for their ability to be safe and respected and protected. I'm voting for them to live in a democracy that reflects them and that gives them the power that they deserve. I'm voting for our tribal nations. I'm voting for our future, our natural resources. I'm voting for accountability in our police and in our judiciary. I'm voting for issues that I think mean a lot to me and to the future and to our nations.
Oh, I appreciate that. It wasn't politicized. Your vote is personal, and that really touches my heart to think that you're not just working for us, but it's such a personal quest for you to be in this work and doing this work. With that, is there anything else that you want our audience to know as they move forward and getting their ballot cast?
I know that it is hard sometimes to vote. Logistically, hard to vote. I know that sometimes it costs money to vote. A tank of gas, time. I know that it is an investment that you have to make just to get it done. It's a chore. And so thank you to those of you that take on that burden. It's important, and you're not alone. Even if you feel like you're alone, you are not alone. You can call again that number 1-866-OUR-VOTE, and you can email vote@narf.org. And if something doesn't feel right, err on the side of raising your hand to tell people about it. And we're here to help you, and we believe in you, and we know that it's going to make a difference.
Thank you. We will be posting the links that Jacqueline has mentioned throughout this series in the comments sections below our Facebook Live recording. And we look forward to having a conversation this Friday with the editor of Indian Country Today, Mark Trahan, will be joining us Friday at 5 Mountain, 6 p.m. Central. And we look forward to you building power with us, political power, as we move forward with advanced Native political leadership. Thank you so much for your time, Jacqueline. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching.
Thank you.